They beat her till she couldn't stand. The cowboy said, "You'll never kneel to anyone again." From the moment she could walk, she learned to keep her head down, to move quietly through the alleys, and to avoid drawing attention. Her family was poor, her house small, and the world outside seemed full of dangers waiting at every corner. But despite all this, Alina had a quiet fire inside her, a determination that she didn't yet fully understand. The trouble had begun months earlier. A group of men in the town had taken to mocking and intimidating her. They called her names, pushed her around in the market, and laughed when she tried to defend herself. It wasn't only the strangers. Even some townspeople would glance the other way when things went wrong. No one wanted to get involved, and Alina quickly learned that help would not come from anyone else. She had to find it within herself, though at this point, she wasn't sure she even could. That evening, the air was thick with dust, and the fading light of the sun made long shadows across the narrow streets. Alina had been walking home from the small bakery where she worked, carrying the day's earnings in her worn leather purse. She tried to ignore the rough laughter of the men who loitered near the corner. She had avoided them countless times before, but this time, something in her heart told her she couldn't just keep running forever. She wanted to stand up for herself, even if it was only a little. As she passed, one of the men stepped forward, blocking her path. His boots kicked up the dust, and he smiled in a way that made her stomach twist. Well, if it isn't little Alina," he sneered. "You think you can just walk past us without saying anything?" Alina swallowed hard. Her hands trembled, but she straightened her back. "I just want to pass," she said quietly, though her voice had more strength than she expected. The man laughed, a cruel, low sound. "Pass? Nobody passes without a word around here." "Not from you." His friends closed in, circling her like predators. The world seemed to narrow, the streets suddenly too small for her to move. She tried to push past, but they grabbed her arms, yanking her backward. Pain exploded when one of them struck her in the side. Alina stumbled, falling to her knees in the dirt. She tried to rise, tried to defend herself, but every movement brought another blow. Her hands scraped against the ground, her face stung, and tears blurred her vision. She felt the sting of humiliation almost as sharply as the sting of the hits. She had never been hit like this before. She had never felt so powerless. "Stop!" she wanted to scream, but her voice was drowned by laughter and jeers. "Please just let me go," but no one came. The neighbors had closed their windows, the doors were shut, and the world felt like it had turned its back on her. It was not just the pain in her body, but the sense of complete isolation that made it almost unbearable. Eventually, the men grew tired or perhaps bored and shoved her roughly to the ground. Alina lay there, her knees scraped, her arms bruised, her chest heaving from the effort of just trying to breathe. She could barely stand, barely move, and she felt a hollow ache deep inside her, not just from the beating, but from the realization that she had been completely alone. For a long while, Alina didn't even try to rise. The sunset painted the streets in gold and shadow, and the town seemed to hum with the normal sounds of life that did not include her pain. She listened to the wind whisper through the alley, to the faint clatter of pots and pans in the kitchens nearby, and she felt the tears run down her cheeks. She wanted to cry, but she also wanted to hold on to something, some small piece of pride that said she would not let this break her entirely. Minutes passed, maybe hours. She didn't know. All she knew was that the sky above darkened slowly, the stars beginning to appear, quiet witnesses to her suffering. And then she heard something she didn't expect, a calm, steady voice. "You shouldn't be left like this," the voice said. Alina's head lifted slightly. Through the dim light, she saw a figure approaching, walking with a kind of ease and confidence that was rare in the town. A cowboy, she realized, though she had never seen one like him before. He moved carefully, watching her, not like the men who had hurt her, but like someone who understood pain and respect at the same time. The man knelt beside her. His presence was comforting in a way she hadn't felt in months. "Are you hurt badly?" he asked, not with judgment but with concern. Alina shook her head weakly, not trusting her voice. The tears still ran down her face, leaving tracks through the dirt. "You don't have to stay here," he said softly. "Nobody deserves to be treated this way." For the first time since the beating, Alina felt a flicker of hope. Someone had seen her suffering. Someone had come not to laugh, not to mock, but to care. She didn't know his name, and she didn't know why he was here, but she felt a tiny spark inside her chest. Maybe this was the start of something new, something that could help her stand again. The cowboy helped her to her feet slowly. He didn't rush, didn't pressure, but held her steady until she could balance on her own. Her legs shook from the pain, and her body ached with every movement, but she didn't feel entirely broken anymore. Not while he was there. "You'll never have to kneel to anyone again," he said quietly, almost like a promise. "Not if you don't want to." The words struck her in a way that nothing else had. For months, she had felt like the world demanded she bend, that she had to submit to cruelty just to survive. But now, hearing those words, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to. They walked slowly toward the edge of town, the cowboy supporting her when she stumbled. Alina didn't know who he was or why he cared, but she trusted him in a way she had trusted no one before. With each step, she felt a little stronger, a little more like herself. The beating had taken her to the lowest point of her life, but it had not destroyed her completely. As they walked, Alina began to think about what it meant to be strong. It wasn't about fighting back right away, she realized. It wasn't about revenge or proving herself to the cruel people of the town. It was about surviving, about learning that she could rise again, and about finding people who would stand beside her, even if only for a moment. By the time they reached a quiet spot just outside the town, Alina was still bruised, still sore, still trembling, but she was standing. And standing was a start. It was the first small victory after a long night of pain and fear. And with the cowboy by her side, offering quiet encouragement, she began to imagine that the world might not be as hopeless as it had seemed. For Alina, that night was the beginning of a journey she hadn't expected. She had been broken, beaten, and left alone, but she had also discovered that kindness and courage could appear in unexpected ways. And deep down, in the quiet of her bruised body and aching heart, she felt the first flicker of a fire that could grow into strength, a fire that would not let her kneel to anyone again. The morning after the beating, Alina woke with a dull ache running through her body. Every movement caused a reminder of the previous night's pain, and her knees and arms were bruised and tender. Yet, there was something different in her heart. For the first time in months, she felt that she wasn't completely alone. The cowboy, whose name she had learned was Jackson, had stayed nearby, offering a quiet presence that comforted her in ways words could not. Jackson had insisted she rest, bringing her water and a small meal. He spoke little, but each word was careful, patient, and full of understanding. "You need time to heal," he said, "not just on the outside, but on the inside too." Alina listened, noticing that his eyes never judged her, never looked at her as weak or less than. For her, this was a new kind of attention, one that did not carry cruelty or mockery, but genuine care. Alina had always been cautious around strangers. She had learned that trusting anyone could be dangerous, but there was something about Jackson that felt different. He didn't demand anything from her, didn't lecture or scold. He simply offered support, and though she was unsure why, she felt drawn to his calm strength. It was as if he carried a quiet confidence that said he had seen suffering before, and he knew that people could rise again, no matter how deep the pain ran. Days passed slowly. Alina spent most of her time recovering, tending to her bruises and resting her body. Jackson would occasionally bring food, check on her, or simply sit quietly nearby, giving her space but making sure she wasn't truly alone. The town still buzzed with life, indifferent to her struggles, but Alina no longer felt trapped in that isolation. She had someone by her side who believed in her ability to heal, someone who seemed to understand that strength could grow from the most difficult moments. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Jackson spoke in a way that caught her attention. "You have more strength than you know," he said. "Pain can teach us, but it doesn't have to define us. If you want, I can help you stand again, not just physically, but in your heart." Alina's eyes widened. Stand again. She had not thought of that as possible. She had imagined herself broken forever, kneeling under the weight of the town's cruelty. But Jackson's words sparked a tiny ember of hope. Could she truly rise again? Could she find the courage to face the world, to face those who had hurt her, and to never let herself be humiliated like that again? Over the next few days, Jackson began teaching Alina small exercises. At first, they were simple: walking carefully across uneven ground to build balance, stretching to ease the stiffness in her muscles, learning to breathe through pain rather than letting it overwhelm her. He was patient, never rushing her, always reminding her that progress came in small steps. "You don't have to run or fight yet," he said one afternoon, as Alina struggled to lift herself from a low bench. "You just need to know that your body and your spirit can support you. That's the first step." Alina followed his guidance carefully. She felt the soreness in her muscles, the ache of old fear pressing against her mind, but she also began to notice something she hadn't felt in a long time: a sense of accomplishment. Each small movement, each tiny victory over pain, reminded her that she could take control of her body, that she was not completely powerless. As the days turned into weeks, Jackson introduced more challenges. He taught her to defend herself if necessary, to hold her ground when confronted, and to trust her instincts. At first, Alina hesitated. She had never imagined herself in such situations. The fear she had carried for so long made her want to shrink, to hide, to run. But Jackson's steady presence and encouragement gave her the courage to try. "You don't have to fight to prove anything," he said gently, as she practiced blocking a shove from a makeshift stick. "You fight to protect yourself, to protect your peace, to show that no one has the right to control you. That is true strength." Alina began to understand. Strength was not about being the toughest person in the room. It was about refusing to be controlled by fear, refusing to allow cruelty to dictate her life. Slowly, she felt herself growing stronger, not just in body but in spirit. She no longer felt the weight of the world pressing her down entirely. She felt for the first time the possibility of freedom. Jackson also shared stories of others he had helped, people who had been beaten down, humiliated, or trapped in hopeless situations. Each story carried lessons of resilience, courage, and self-respect. Alina listened closely, absorbing each one, imagining herself walking out of the darkness just as they had. She began to see a path forward, a way to rise again without losing her kindness or humanity. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and gold, Alina and Jackson sat by the edge of town. The world was quiet, the wind soft against their faces. Jackson looked at her and said, "Do you understand what I mean when I say, you'll never kneel to anyone again?" Alina thought for a moment. She had repeated the phrase in her mind countless times since the night he first said it. Now, she could feel its meaning in her heart. It wasn't just about not bowing to those who had hurt her. It was about refusing to give her power away to fear, to cruelty, or to despair. It was about standing tall, even when the world seemed determined to push her down. "Yes," she whispered, "I think I understand." Jackson smiled, a gentle expression of approval and encouragement. "Good," he said, "because understanding is the first step, acting on it comes next, and I know you can." Over the following weeks, Alina continued her training with Jackson. Each day brought new challenges, new lessons, and new victories. She learned to move with confidence, to trust her instincts, and to face her fears with a clear mind. She began to notice changes in herself that went beyond the physical. Her posture was stronger, her gaze steadier, and her heart lighter. She no longer felt the crushing weight of hopelessness that had once defined her life. The townspeople began to notice the change too, though they did not understand it fully. Alina walked through the streets with a quiet confidence, no longer shrinking in fear at the laughter or sneers of those who had once tormented her. She did not provoke or challenge them aggressively. She simply existed with a strength that could not be ignored. Through it all, Jackson remained by her side, not as a teacher commanding obedience, but as a guide offering wisdom and support. He taught her that strength was not about fighting everyone, but about choosing when and how to stand. He showed her that courage could be quiet and steadfast, not loud and aggressive. And most importantly, he reminded her that she deserved to live free, without fear, without submission, without the weight of past pain holding her down. One day, as they practiced balancing on a narrow wooden beam across a shallow creek, Alina almost lost her footing. For a moment, fear surged up, reminding her of the night she had been beaten. But Jackson's calm voice reached her, steady. "You've got this." She took a deep breath, focused, and found her balance. The beam held and she crossed successfully. Alina laughed, a sound of triumph that surprised even her. It was not loud or boastful. It was a laugh that carried relief, joy, and pride all at once. She had faced her fear and moved forward, one step at a time. And with each step, she felt herself rising further from the darkness that had once seemed inescapable. By the end of the month, Alina had transformed in ways she could barely describe. She was stronger, braver, and more self-assured. She knew that challenges would still come, that the town could still be cruel, and that life would never be entirely free of hardship. But she also knew that she had the inner strength to face whatever came her way. She had learned to trust herself, to stand for herself, and to walk with her head held high. And through it all, Jackson's words remained in her mind, a constant reminder of her new truth: "You'll never kneel to anyone again." The phrase was no longer just a promise. It was a reality she lived every day, in every step, in every breath. Alina had found her courage, her freedom, and her strength. And though the journey was far from over, she had taken the first, most important steps toward a life of dignity, power, and hope. Alina had begun to feel a new sense of life inside her, but she knew that true strength was more than just learning to walk without fear or to balance herself carefully across a beam. Real strength, Jackson told her, came from within, from the heart, the mind, and the will to face challenges head-on, even when the world seemed determined to hold her down. One morning, Jackson arrived at her small home with a calm expression, carrying a bundle of simple tools. "Today," he said, "we start something different. It's time to rebuild more than your balance. It's time to rebuild your confidence, your courage, and your voice." Alina looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and nervousness. She had never thought of herself as someone who could truly face the people who had hurt her. The memory of the beating, the laughter, and the fear still lingered, sharp as a thorn in her chest. Yet Jackson's steady gaze encouraged her, telling her silently that she could rise above it. They began with small challenges at first. Jackson taught her to speak clearly, to assert herself even in small situations. They practiced in quiet corners of the town where no one would notice, but Alina could feel the difference. The first time she raised her voice to ask a shopkeeper for a loaf of bread politely but firmly, her hands shook, but she did it. The sense of accomplishment was subtle, almost imperceptible, yet it strengthened her in ways that no physical training could. "Every word you speak is a step forward," Jackson told her. "You don't have to shout or fight to be strong. You just have to claim your space in the world, and no one can take that from you." Alina practiced every day. She learned to stand tall, to walk without shrinking, and to make eye contact with those around her. The townspeople began to notice the change. Some were surprised, others curious, but none could deny that Alina carried herself differently now. She had the quiet confidence of someone who had faced darkness and refused to be consumed by it. Next, Jackson began to teach her practical self-defense skills, not to provoke others but to protect herself if necessary. He showed her how to move quickly, to use her weight wisely, and to anticipate danger. At first, Alina struggled. Her body remembered the pain of the beating, and fear often made her freeze. But Jackson was patient. He encouraged her gently, reminding her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. "You're stronger than you realize," he said one afternoon as she practiced blocking a shove from a wooden staff. "Strength isn't just about muscles, it's about the mind, the heart, and the will to keep going." Alina began to understand. Every blocked strike, every step she took without hesitation, was a victory. Every moment she chose to stand firm rather than shrink away was a declaration that she would no longer be controlled by fear. And slowly she began to feel a new kind of power, a power that came not from hurting others but from protecting herself, from claiming her own dignity. Jackson also taught her to observe people carefully, to notice intentions, and to trust her instincts. He explained that often, danger could be avoided not by confrontation, but by understanding and foresight. Alina learned to read subtle cues, the way someone moved, the expression in their eyes, the tone of their voice. These lessons gave her a sense of control she had never experienced before. She felt that she could navigate the world with awareness and intelligence, not just brute force or blind courage. As the days passed, Alina grew bolder. She ventured into areas of the town she had once avoided, walking with her head held high, her steps steady. The men who had once tormented her noticed her presence and stared, unsure how to react. For the first time, Alina did not shrink. She did not beg or retreat. She simply walked, claiming her space, confident that she had the right to be there. One afternoon, Jackson and Alina sat on the edge of the town, overlooking the hills beyond. The wind was warm and gentle, carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh earth. "You've come far," Jackson said quietly. "But the real test isn't just in learning these skills. It's in facing the moments when fear returns. You must decide in your heart that no one will ever make you feel powerless again." Alina looked at him, understanding the weight of his words. She had learned to stand, to defend herself, and to carry herself with confidence. But the fear, the memory of the beating, still lingered, whispering that the world was cruel and that she was small and weak. She realized that true freedom required more than physical skill. It required a deep, unshakable belief in herself. The next challenge came sooner than she expected. One evening, as Alina walked home from helping a neighbor carry firewood, the group of men who had once beaten her appeared. Their laughter and mocking voices filled the narrow street. Alina's heart skipped a beat. The memory of the pain, the fear, and the humiliation surged in her chest. But this time was different. She remembered Jackson's lessons, his words, and the fire that had begun to burn inside her. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and met their gaze calmly. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her voice steady. The men paused, surprised. Alina's eyes held something they had not seen before: strength, courage, and the refusal to be controlled. One of the men stepped forward, his expression angry, but Alina did not flinch. She remembered the movements Jackson had taught her, the way to stay balanced and confident. "Back off," she said firmly. Her words carried more weight than any shove or punch could. The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had expected fear, hesitation, or tears. Instead, they found a woman who refused to be intimidated. Slowly, they backed away, muttering curses under their breath. Alina walked home that night with a mixture of relief and triumph. She had faced the very people who had hurt her and had not bowed. She had felt fear, but she had not let it control her. She had discovered a strength she did not know she possessed, a power that came from within, from courage, and from the refusal to surrender her dignity. In the days that followed, Alina continued to practice her skills and to strengthen her mind. She helped neighbors, carried herself with confidence, and even began to mentor younger girls in the town, teaching them the importance of self-respect and courage. She realized that strength was not just personal, it was something that could inspire and protect others. Jackson watched her with quiet pride. He had guided her, supported her, and taught her, but the real transformation came from within Alina herself. She had chosen to rise above the cruelty, to reclaim her power, and to never kneel to anyone again. One afternoon, as they walked together through the hills beyond the town, Alina looked out over the valley and felt a deep sense of freedom. She had faced fear, pain, and humiliation, and she had emerged stronger. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. She had discovered that true strength came from believing in herself, from refusing to be broken, and from standing tall in a world that often demanded submission. Jackson placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've grown," he said simply. "And the journey isn't over, but you are ready for whatever comes next. You'll never kneel to anyone again." Alina smiled, feeling the weight of the words in her heart. They were no longer just a promise from Jackson, they were a truth she had earned. She had faced darkness and refused to be consumed by it. She had learned to stand, to speak, and to move with courage. And as she walked beside Jackson, looking out over the world that had once seemed so cruel, she knew that her life had changed forever. The road ahead was uncertain, and challenges would still come. But Alina had discovered something far more important than safety or comfort. She had discovered herself. She had discovered a courage that could not be taken, a dignity that could not be broken, and a fire inside her that would burn bright no matter what the world tried to do. And in that moment, Alina understood the full meaning of Jackson's words. "You'll never kneel to anyone again." Alina had changed in ways that even she sometimes found hard to believe. The fear that had once weighed her down like a heavy cloak was now lighter, almost manageable, and she could see the world around her differently. She walked through the streets with her head held high, her steps steady, and a calm awareness of the people and dangers nearby. The town had grown used to her quiet presence, and many had begun to notice her strength. But there were still those who resented it, those who had once ruled her with cruelty, and they were not ready to let go of their control so easily. One afternoon, as the sun began to cast long shadows across the narrow streets, Alina heard the familiar mocking laughter. Her heart tightened at first, a reflex she could no longer ignore, but she reminded herself to breathe. This time, she would not run, she would not hide, and she would not let fear control her. She knew that facing them directly was the only way to truly move beyond the pain of the past. The group of men who had once tormented her appeared, their faces twisted with surprise and irritation. They had expected the same frightened, kneeling girl they had beaten before, but they were met with someone entirely different. Alina stood tall, her shoulders back, her eyes steady. There was a quiet power in her presence that made the men hesitate, even for a moment. One of them stepped forward, his voice loud and mocking. Well, if it isn't little Alina. Think you're brave now, huh?" Alina did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. Instead, she met him calmly, her voice clear and firm. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. The words felt strong in her mouth, carrying the weight of every lesson she had learned, every step she had taken to stand again. The men laughed, but it was a nervous laughter, the kind that trembles at the edges. They had expected her to crumble, to shrink, to beg for mercy, but Alina's quiet confidence unsettled them. They shifted uncomfortably, unsure of how to respond to someone who no longer lived in fear of them. One of the men tried to shove her, testing her resolve. Alina did not move backward. She remembered the lessons Jackson had taught her, the way to balance herself, to stay grounded, and to trust her instincts. She did not strike, she did not yell, she simply held her ground, her gaze unwavering. The shove had no effect. She was solid, unmoving, and that alone conveyed a message stronger than any punch could. "You're not going to control me anymore," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I will not kneel to anyone." The words hung in the air like a declaration. The men exchanged uneasy glances. They had ruled the town through fear and intimidation for a long time, but they were not prepared for someone who had learned to rise above it. Slowly they began to back away, muttering curses under their breath, defeated not by force, but by the strength and courage that radiated from Alina. Alina did not celebrate or gloat. She simply walked through the street, steady and confident, knowing that she had faced the very people who had once hurt her and had emerged unbroken. The act of standing her ground, refusing to bow to cruelty, was a victory far greater than any fight could have been. She had learned that true strength was not in striking others down, but in protecting her own dignity and refusing to be intimidated. Over the next few days, the change in Alina was noticeable to everyone in the town. People who had once ignored her now looked at her with respect. The younger girls in the town began to follow her example, learning from her courage and quiet determination. She became a symbol of hope for those who had suffered in silence, showing that it was possible to rise above fear and cruelty. Jackson remained by her side, guiding her subtly, offering advice only when needed. He encouraged her to continue developing her skills, to trust her instincts, and to stay aware of her surroundings. But he also reminded her that her true power came from within. "The world will always have those who try to push you down," he said. "But the strength to rise again, to walk tall, to live free, that is yours, and no one can take it from you." One evening, as they walked along a quiet path outside the town, Alina reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the night she had been beaten, the fear and helplessness she had felt, and the despair that had threatened to consume her. She had thought that moment would define her life forever. Yet here she was, walking tall, confident, and free. The memory of pain still existed, but it no longer held power over her. The journey had not been easy. There had been days when she felt weak, moments when fear returned, and nights when the memories haunted her. But with each step, each lesson, and each challenge she faced, Alina had grown stronger. She had learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward despite it. She had discovered that strength was not measured by how much one could endure, but by the choice to refuse submission and claim one's own dignity. Her growth also inspired others in the town. Neighbors who had once ignored cruelty began to stand against injustice. The younger girls found a role model in Alina, learning that they too could rise above fear and oppression. Even some of the men who had once sought to intimidate her began to change, recognizing that strength could be quiet and dignified, not loud or aggressive. Alina's relationship with Jackson grew deeper as well. He had not only guided her through physical and mental training, but he had also taught her the importance of compassion, wisdom, and resilience. She learned that true power was not about dominating others, but about protecting oneself, helping others, and standing tall in the face of adversity. Jackson's quiet mentorship had helped her transform from a frightened, bruised girl into a confident, courageous young woman. One afternoon, Alina faced another test of her courage. A new group of strangers came into the town, looking to cause trouble. Alina felt the familiar stir of fear, but this time it was tempered by determination. She knew that running or hiding would no longer serve her. She stood her ground, facing the newcomers with calm confidence, her eyes steady and unwavering. "You will not intimidate me or anyone else here," she said firmly. The strangers paused, unsure how to respond to someone so composed and self-assured. Alina's stance, her voice, and the calm strength radiating from her presence sent a clear message. She was no longer a victim, she was no longer powerless, and she would not bow to anyone. The strangers eventually left, realizing that this town was no longer a place where fear ruled. Alina watched them go, a sense of pride and relief filling her heart. She had faced challenges head-on, and each time she had emerged stronger, more confident, and more self-assured. She had learned that standing tall was not just an act of defiance, but a declaration of one's dignity, courage, and freedom. As the days passed, Alina continued to strengthen her mind, body, and spirit. She practiced her skills, helped others in the town, and walked with a confidence that inspired those around her. Her journey was far from over, but she had reached a point where fear no longer controlled her life. She had faced her oppressors, overcome her doubts, and discovered a power within herself that could not be taken away. Jackson watched her quietly, proud of the transformation he had witnessed. Alina had not only survived the hardships she had faced, but she had risen above them. She had learned to protect herself, to stand tall, and to inspire others. And most importantly, she had embraced the truth of Jackson's words, "You'll never kneel to anyone again." Alina's journey in the town had become more than a story of survival. It had become a story of courage, resilience, and hope. She had discovered that strength was not measured by the absence of fear, but by the ability to face it and move forward. She had learned that true power came from self-respect, compassion, and the determination to live life on her own terms. By standing up to those who had once sought to harm her, Alina had claimed her freedom. She had shown the town that fear could be replaced with courage, oppression with dignity, and despair with hope. She had become a symbol of strength, not only for herself, but for everyone who had once felt powerless. And in that quiet, steady way, Alina realized that she had become the person she had always wanted to be. She had faced her fears, she had stood her ground, and she had refused to kneel to anyone. The journey had been long and difficult, but the result was worth every step. Alina had discovered that true strength was not in avoiding challenges, but in meeting them with courage, wisdom, and an unshakable belief in herself. Alina had come a long way from the frightened, bruised girl who had once knelt in the dusty streets of her town. She now moved with a quiet confidence that drew respect, curiosity, and admiration from those around her. The lessons she had learned, the courage she had built, and the strength she had discovered within herself were all now a part of who she was. Yet she knew that the journey was far from over. Strength was not only about facing fear, it was about embracing life fully and helping others find their courage too. Jackson had always reminded her that true power came from using her strength wisely, to protect herself, and to lift others rather than to intimidate or control. Alina understood this more than ever now. She began spending more time helping those who had been overlooked, bullied, or ignored in the town. She guided younger girls in learning self-confidence, showing them that they did not need to live in fear, that they could stand tall no matter what others said or did. One morning she met a group of children playing near the edge of the town. They were shy, hesitant, and seemed unsure of their own worth. Alina knelt down to speak to them, her voice gentle yet firm. "You are stronger than you think," she told them. "You can face the world with courage. No one can take that from you." The children listened, wide-eyed and quiet at first, but slowly began to mimic her confident stance and her steady movements. They laughed and played freely, learning from her example. Alina felt a deep warmth in her heart. She realized that the strength she had built was not only for herself, it could inspire others and create change beyond her own life. As the weeks passed, Alina and Jackson began to plan for their departure from the town. The place that had once been so cruel now felt like a home transformed by courage, hope, and resilience. Alina had faced her oppressors, stood tall in the face of fear, and helped others see that they too could rise. It was time to move forward, to explore a world that stretched far beyond the narrow streets and dusty alleys of her town. Before leaving, Alina made a point to walk through the streets one last time. She passed the places where she had once knelt, where she had felt powerless and alone. She touched the walls she had leaned against, feeling the rough texture under her fingers, and smiled quietly to herself. These streets, once filled with fear, now held memories of triumph, courage, and transformation. Alina had claimed her dignity here, and she knew that she could carry it wherever she went. As she walked, the townspeople watched with admiration. They had witnessed her journey from fear to strength, from silence to confidence. Many had been inspired to stand taller themselves, to speak up against injustice, and to help one another. Alina realized that her journey had created ripples of change that would continue long after she left. She had not only found her own freedom, but had also sown seeds of courage in others. Finally, she reached the edge of town, where the hills rolled gently into the horizon. Jackson stood beside her, the sun casting a warm glow over the landscape. Alina felt a mixture of excitement and nostalgia. She was leaving behind the place where she had grown, where she had faced her fears, and where she had learned what true strength meant. Yet she also felt a thrill at the thought of new beginnings, new experiences, and the freedom to live her life on her own terms. Jackson looked at her with quiet pride. "You have done well," he said. "You have faced the past, embraced your strength, and helped others along the way. Now it is time for you to continue your journey. Remember, you will never kneel to anyone again." Alina nodded, feeling the words settle deeply in her heart. They were no longer just advice or encouragement. They were a truth she had earned, a reality she lived every day. She had faced cruelty, fear, and pain, and she had emerged stronger, braver, and more compassionate than she had ever imagined possible. As they walked down the hill together, Alina reflected on the lessons she had learned. She understood now that courage was not about never feeling fear. It was about choosing to move forward despite it. Strength was not about dominating others. It was about protecting oneself, inspiring others, and refusing to be broken. And freedom was not simply the absence of danger. It was the presence of dignity, self-respect, and the ability to live life fully without fear of submission. Along their journey, Alina and Jackson came across small villages and towns where people were struggling with similar hardships. Alina's experience gave her insight and compassion, and she began to offer guidance wherever she could. She shared her story quietly but powerfully, showing others that no matter how deep the darkness, there was always a way to rise above it. People listened, learned, and slowly began to embrace their own strength, inspired by the courage she embodied. One evening, as they rested near a riverbank, Alina watched the reflection of the setting sun in the water. She thought about the girl she had once been, the one who had been beaten and left kneeling in the dirt, and she felt a sense of gratitude. The pain, though immense, had taught her resilience. The fear had led her to courage, and the guidance she had received had shown her that strength could be nurtured, practiced, and shared. She had grown not just in body or skill, but in heart, mind, and spirit. Jackson smiled at her quietly. "You've changed more than you know," he said, "and the world will be better because of the strength you share." Alina felt a surge of hope. Her journey had started with fear and pain, but it had led to freedom, compassion, and empowerment. She realized that life would always have challenges, but she now had the tools, mindset, and courage to face them. She had learned that every obstacle was an opportunity to rise, every act of fear was a chance to find courage, and every struggle was a lesson in resilience. As the stars began to appear in the night sky, Alina and Jackson continued walking, the soft sound of the river accompanying their steps. Alina felt light, free, and unafraid. She knew that the world was vast and full of uncertainty, but she also knew that she carried something far more powerful than fear or doubt. She carried herself. She carried her courage, her dignity, and the unwavering belief that she would never kneel to anyone again. Days turned into weeks, and Alina's travels took her further from her old town. She met people who had faced hardships of their own, each with stories of fear, struggle, and perseverance. Alina shared her lessons, helped those in need, and inspired courage wherever she went. She realized that her journey was not just about personal freedom, it was about making a difference in the lives of others. Each person she helped, each story she touched, was a continuation of the transformation she had begun in her own life. Eventually, Alina found a place where she could settle for a time, a small, welcoming village where she felt a sense of belonging. She helped rebuild homes, taught self-confidence to children, and offered guidance to those struggling with fear or oppression. The villagers came to respect her not only for her skills, but for the wisdom and compassion she carried. Alina had transformed from a victim of cruelty to a source of hope, courage, and inspiration. And through it all, Jackson remained a steady presence, a reminder of the journey she had taken and the lessons she had learned. He never sought recognition or reward. He simply supported, guided, and believed in her. Alina knew that without his guidance, she might not have discovered the strength that had always been within her. She carried his teachings forward, ensuring that every step she took reflected the courage, dignity, and wisdom he had helped her uncover. In the quiet moments, when Alina reflected on her life, she felt a deep sense of peace. The girl who had once knelt in fear no longer existed. She had been replaced by a woman who walked tall, spoke with confidence, and faced the world with courage. Her journey had been long, difficult, and filled with moments of doubt, but it had led to freedom, empowerment, and a purpose that extended far beyond herself. And as she looked to the future, Alina knew one thing for certain: she would never kneel to anyone again. That truth had been forged in pain, strengthened by courage, and confirmed through action. It was a promise to herself, a lesson to others, and a guiding principle that would shape every step of her life. Alina's story had become more than a personal triumph. It was a story of hope, resilience, and the power of the human spirit to rise above fear and cruelty. It was a reminder that no matter how dark the past, no matter how deep the pain, there is always a way to reclaim dignity, strength, and freedom. And for Alina, the future was bright, full of possibilities, and entirely her own to shape.